Praise the Intern, written by Ink in My Heart and on the Page, and read for you by Eleanor Elizabeth. Summary. Peter, what are you doing home? I thought you were getting ready at Tony's. Peter blinked. Ready for what? May rolled her eyes fondly. Stark Industries launch party? You've been working hard on that project. Don't tell me you've forgotten. Peter had forgotten about the launch party. Or, Peter has a fight with Tony and storms off, forgetting that he has to go to a launch party with the man. Peter's not sure he'll be wanted there. Frustration lingered under Peter's skin, like tiny little bites of electricity thrumming through his veins. His hands curled into fists by his side, and he was trying hard not to stamp his foot like a 5-year-old. That's not fair! Life isn't fair, kiddo, Tony said, his face set in a hard line, arms crossed over his chest. Now, hand it over. Peter clutched the Spider-Man suit in his hand a little tighter. Mr. Stark! No! Tony cut Peter off, his eyes narrowed. I don't want to hear it. Hand over the suit. Now. Peter glared, his teeth grinding together. The thought of just turning and running with the suit crossed Peter's mind, but he had enough self-preservation to know that would be a terrible idea. Instead, Peter flung the suit at Tony as hard as he could. Tony caught it easily. He held up the suit, the fabric unspooling to reveal a large knife gash across the thigh of the suit. Tony's face darkened even further. He turned his gaze from the gash and looked to Peter. It's not that bad, Peter blurted out before Tony could say anything. I had everything under control. Under control? Tony asked, his voice dangerous. You were 2 seconds from bleeding out in my bathroom. Peter shifted his weight. The healing wound on his leg tugged slightly. The bandage felt thick under his jeans, and he could feel the skin healing. I wasn't... Tony's furious glare cut Peter off, and he huffed. I was fine. You were not fine, Tony snapped, tossing the suit onto the workbench. And what the hell were you thinking, trying to stitch it up by yourself? I don't need help, Peter snapped. It's already healing. I don't see what the big deal is. You could have died, Tony growled. That's the big deal. You've been reckless lately, and that ends now. You're benched. Peter's jaw dropped open. No! Yes, Tony snapped. You're benched until I say so. You can't do that, Peter protested. He made an aborted move to grab the suit, but Tony pushed it out of his reach. Watch me, Tony snarled, his eyes flashing dangerously. Peter clamped his mouth shut and glared at Tony. The man was unmoved, though, glaring right back at Peter. Fine, Peter snapped and spun on his heel, ignoring the twinge it brought to his still-healing leg, and limped for the exit. Where do you think you're going? Tony demanded. Home, Peter snapped back and limped out of the lab. Nobody stopped Peter as he got into the elevator and made his way down to the lobby of the tower. He limped out and headed straight for the subway. Anger burned under his skin with every step he took. It wasn't fair. That suit was Peter's. Tony had no right to take it away from him. Tony made it, a little voice in Peter's mind said as he got into the subway, the door shutting behind him with a hiss. He had every right to take it. The anger faded quickly as his adrenaline dropped. Peter swayed with the train car as it rocked from side to side as it hurtled down the track. Peter shifted his weight off his injured leg with a wince. Guilt replaced the anger, making Peter feel sick. He had been on patrol when a mugger with a knife had almost got the better of Peter, slashing him across the thigh. Only just managing to web up the mugger, Peter had webbed his wound before swinging back to the tower. He hadn't wanted to let Tony know that he'd been hurt again, so he attempted to stitch the wound before his mentor found out. Peter hadn't expected Tony to burst into the bathroom while Peter was halfway through stitching his leg, the toilet, his hands, and the floor covered in his blood. Tony had gone so pale that Peter had feared that he would pass out. Instead, Tony had fallen to his knees beside Peter, taking the needle out of Peter's hand and finished the rest before wrapping it in a bandage and helping him clean up. Then the lecture had started. Looking back on the whole situation with less anger, Peter knew he had been in the wrong. Tony had every right to yell at him and take away the suit. Peter had been so incredibly stupid. He just hadn't wanted Tony to yell at him for getting hurt again. Except for, if he just called Tony instead of hiding the injury, maybe Tony wouldn't have yelled. By the time Peter got off the train at his stop, he felt miserable. After his actions, he would be lucky if Tony ever talked to him again. When Peter got home, all he wanted to do was fall into bed, draw up the covers, and wallow in his stupidity. That thought went out of the window when May emerged from her room, dressed in a fancy dress and a frown on her face. "Peter? What are you doing home? I thought you were getting ready at Tony's." Peter blinked. "Ready for what?" May rolled her eyes fondly. "Stark Industries' launch party? You've been working hard on that project. Don't tell me you've forgotten." Peter had forgotten about the launch party. Stark Industries was launching a brand new tablet that was more energy efficient and made from recyclable materials. A part of Peter's internship was to help develop an app that was designed for students. They had been working on it for months and had only just finished it in time before the launch. At Peter's silence, May chuckled. "Oh, sweetheart. Well, you're here now. You better have a shower. Make it quick or we'll be late." When Peter didn't move, May gently gave him a shove towards the bathroom. Peter got ready on autopilot, guilt making his head spin. He wasn't sure Tony would want him there. Not after everything Peter had done. "Are you nervous, hun?" May asked as they stepped into the building that had been rented for the launch. "You were quiet on the way over." "Yeah," Peter lied. He couldn't bring himself to tell May what had happened. He didn't think he could survive if May was disappointed in him too. Just nervous. "You'll do amazing, sweetie," May said. "I'm so proud of you." May's words left a bitter taste in Peter's mouth. When they were checked in, Peter was quickly snatched away from May by the other interns. Thankfully, they weren't involved in any of the presentations, and they hovered together as they watched Tony announce the new tablet. The presentation went off without a hitch, Tony dominating the stage. Peter clapped along with everyone when the presentation ended, something sharp twisting in his heart. Peter was drawn into conversations with important people, making him both excited and nervous. As the night wore on, Peter stuck close to May, introducing her to the other interns. "Rather young, don't you think? What's your angle there, Stark?" Peter looked around, spotting Tony talking to a man that Peter didn't recognise. Tony had his back to Peter, so he was unable to see his mentor's facial expression. Peter went to turn and put some distance between them, not wanting to eavesdrop, when Tony spoke up, making him pause. "There is no angle," Tony said, his voice firm. "Peter Parker is one of the most brilliant minds of his generation. I would be a fool not to have taken him on board." "I'm sure he's a bright young lad, but really," the man said, but Tony cut him off. "He's the brightest. His application was one of the best we'd ever received. Peter Parker is going to be the future, and one day we will be working for him. It will be an honour to say that I had the privilege of helping mentor him." Peter's feet were moving before he could stop himself. He reached Tony, throwing his arms around the man's waist and hugged him hard from behind. Tony tensed, clearly startled as Peter pressed his head between Tony's shoulder blades. He relaxed when he realised who it was. He tapped Peter's arm until Peter released him and allowed him to turn around. Peter's face planted into Tony's chest, hugging him again. "I'm sorry," Peter said, his voice muffled by Tony's expensive suit. "I'm so sorry." "Hey." Tony's voice was soft, his hand coming to rub at Peter's back. "Peter, it's not okay," Peter said, lifting his head enough to look at Tony in the eye. "You were right. I was being dumb and a brat, and I never should have yelled at you, and I'm so sorry. I don't deserve the nice things you just said." "Hey, now," Tony cut Peter off. "You deserve the nice things said about you because they're true." He gave Peter a fond look, the anger that had been there hours ago long gone. "I meant every word, kiddo." "I'm sorry," Peter apologised again. "I know," Tony said. His hand came up and squeezed the base of Peter's neck. "You're still benched, though." Peter nodded. "I understand." Tony smiled and shifted so he could wrap an arm around Peter's shoulders. "Come on, let's get you and May a drink. There's a lot of people who want to meet you." Peter leaned into Tony's side and allowed himself to be steered towards May, who was watching them fondly. Peter knew he would make more mistakes in the future. It was a part of growing up, but he would be forever thankful that he had Tony Stark there to help him learn from them.